The police cruiser's red and blue lights painted Sarah's manicured lawn in violent streaks of color as Officer Martinez stepped out, his hand resting on his radio. Across the property line, Karen Westfield stood with her arms crossed, her designer, heels clicking against the concrete as she pointed an accusatory finger at the woman who'd just finished planting roses in her own front yard. "That's my property, officer. She's been stealing it piece by piece for months." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she clutched the deed in her trembling hands, the same deed that would either vindicate her completely or destroy everything she'd worked for. But what Karen didn't know was that this wasn't just about a few feet of disputed land. This was about a secret that would unravel both their lives forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Sarah Chen knelt in the soft earth, her gardening gloves dark with soil. She pressed the last of the pink climbing roses into the ground along what she knew was her property line, the same line she'd measured and remeasured a dozen times since moving into 1247 Maple Street 6 months ago. The sound of a screen door slamming made her look up. Karen Westfield stood on her front porch at 1249 Maple Street, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning light like spun gold. Even at 8 in the morning, she looked like she'd stepped out of a country club brochure. White Capri pants pressed to razor-sharp creases, coral blouse that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget, and those ridiculous designer sandals that clicked against every surface like a countdown timer. "Excuse me." Karen's voice carried the particular brand of authority that came from a lifetime of people doing exactly what she asked. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Sarah sat back on her heels, brushing a strand of dark hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "Planting roses. In my yard." "Your yard." The word came out sharp enough to cut glass. Karen descended her front steps with the measured pace of a predator, her manicured hands already reaching for the phone in her oversized designer purse. "That's my property you're digging up." "No, it's not." Sarah stood, dusting off her jeans. At 5'4", she had to crane her neck to meet Karen's gaze, but she'd learned long ago not to let height intimidate her. Growing up as the daughter of immigrants who'd scraped together every penny to buy their first house had taught her the value of standing your ground. "I had the property surveyed when I bought the house. This is definitely my land." Karen's laugh was like breaking crystal. "Surveyed. Honey, I've lived here for 15 years. I know exactly where my property line is, and you're standing on it." "Then you've been wrong for 15 years. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah watched Karen's perfectly made-up face cycle through several expressions: surprise, indignation, and finally settling on something cold and calculating. "We'll see about that." Karen's fingers flew across her phone screen. "I'm calling the police." Sarah's stomach dropped, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Go ahead. I have all my paperwork inside." "Hello. Yes, I need an officer at 1249 Maple Street immediately." Karen's voice took on a different quality now, breathless and slightly trembling. "My neighbor is destroying my property. She's been doing it for months, taking more and more of my yard, and now Yes, she's right here now, digging up my landscaping." "That's not," Sarah started, but Karen held up a perfectly manicured finger. "No, I don't feel safe confronting her alone. She's been very aggressive about this. Please hurry." Sarah stared at her neighbor in disbelief. "Aggressive? I've barely spoken to you since I moved in." Karen ended the call and slipped her phone back into her purse, her smile sharp as a blade. "They'll be here in 10 minutes. I suggest you use that time to think about how you're going to explain yourself." "I don't need to explain anything. This is my property." "Your property." Karen stepped closer, close enough that Sarah could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something else, something sour, like fear or desperation. "You think you can just move into this neighborhood and start taking whatever you want? This isn't some rundown area where property lines don't matter. This is Maple Street. We have standards here." The words hit Sarah like a slap. She'd heard that tone before, the subtle emphasis on this neighborhood and standards that really meant people like you don't belong here. Her parents had dealt with it when they'd bought their first house in a predominantly white suburb 30 years ago. She'd hoped things would be different now, that she'd earned her place here with her engineering degree and her careful savings and her pristine credit score. "My standards are just fine, thanks." Sarah's voice stayed level, but she felt heat rising in her cheeks. And so is my paperwork. Paperwork can be forged. Are you accusing me of fraud? I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying that paperwork isn't always accurate. But I know what I know. Karen gestured toward the roses Sarah had just planted. Those are sitting right in the middle of my herb garden. Sarah looked at the patch of ground in question. It was covered in weeds and hadn't been touched in months, maybe years. What herb garden? The one I've been planning to plant. I've already bought all the seeds. Planning to plant? That doesn't make it yours. It's been my property for 15 years. The fact that I haven't developed every square inch of it doesn't mean you can just help yourself. The sound of a car engine made them both turn. A black and white police cruiser was rolling down Maple Street, its presence immediately transforming the quiet residential morning into something tense and official. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she watched Officer Martinez step out of the car. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes that seemed to take in the whole scene. The freshly planted roses, Karen's defensive posture, Sarah's dirt-stained clothes, before he'd even reached them. "Ladies," he said, his voice calm and professional. "I got a call about a property dispute." "Officer, thank goodness you're here." Karen stepped forward immediately, her voice taking on that breathless quality again. "This woman has been systematically stealing my property for months. Today I caught her red-handed, digging up my yard to plant those roses." Officer Martinez looked at Sarah. Your side of the story." "I planted roses in my own yard. I have a current survey and property deed that clearly show where my boundaries are." Sarah was proud that her voice stayed steady. "Ms. Westfield is mistaken about where her property line ends." "Mistaken?" Karen's voice pitched higher. "Officer, I've lived here for 15 years. I know every inch of my property. She's already taken at least 6 feet of my front yard, and now she's expanding her garden bed even further onto my land." 6 feet? Sarah stared at her neighbor. "What are you talking about? I've never taken any of your property. Your driveway extension, your garden bed, that decorative fence you put up last month." Karen pointed to each area as she spoke. "All of it is on my side of the property line." "That's impossible. I had everything professionally surveyed before I did any landscaping." Officer Martinez held up his hands. "Okay, let's slow down. Do either of you have documentation of your property boundaries?" "I have my deed and survey inside," Sarah said. "I have my original deed from when I bought the house," Karen added. "And 15 years of living here, maintaining this property, paying taxes on every square foot of it." "All right. Ms. Chen. Sarah Chen. Ms. Chen, would you mind getting your paperwork? And Ms. Westfield. Karen Westfield. Ms. Westfield, if you could get your documentation as well, we can sort this out." Sarah started toward her house, but Karen's voice stopped her. "Officer, I hope you understand that this isn't just about today. This has been an ongoing pattern of harassment and theft. She moved in 6 months ago and immediately started encroaching on my property. When I've tried to discuss it with her civilly, she's been hostile and aggressive." Sarah spun around. "When have you ever tried to discuss anything civilly? The first time you spoke to me was 3 weeks ago when you accused me of stealing your newspaper." "Because you were. It was sitting on my property. It was sitting on the sidewalk between our driveways. That's not your property either." Officer Martinez sighed. "Ladies, let's just get the paperwork and sort this out objectively. Ms. Chen." Sarah hurried inside, her heart pounding. She grabbed the manila folder from her kitchen counter, the one containing her deed, survey, and all the closing documents. From when she'd bought the house, everything was in order. Everything was legal and documented and right. When she returned, Karen was standing next to the police officer with her own folder, speaking in low, urgent tones. Sarah caught fragments, previous incidents. Complained to the HOA. Property values. Here. Sarah handed her folder to Officer Martinez. "Everything's there. The current survey clearly shows where my property ends and Ms. Westfield's begins." Officer Martinez opened the folder and began examining the documents. Karen craned her neck to see over his shoulder. This survey is dated 6 months ago, he said. Right. I had it done as part of the home buying process. And Ms. Westfield, let me see your deed. Karen handed over a much older document, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges. Officer Martinez compared the two sets of paper. Sarah stared at the HOA letter until the words blurred together, her coffee growing cold on the kitchen counter. She'd read it 6 times now, and each time the discrepancies became more glaring. According to the Maple Street Homeowners Association, her property line was a full 8 feet closer to her house than her professional survey indicated. 8 feet that encompassed her driveway extension, her garden bed, and the decorative fence that had taken her 3 weekends to install. Someone was lying. The question was who? Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Marcus. How's suburban paradise treating you? Currently being accused of property theft by my neighbor, she typed back. Send lawyers, guns, and money. Seriously? Dead serious. Can you recommend a property attorney? My sister Emma does real estate law. Want her number. Sarah saved the contact information and immediately dialed. Emma Rodriguez answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. Emma Rodriguez Law Office. Hi, this is Sarah Chen. Marcus Rodriguez gave me your number. I have a property dispute situation that's escalating quickly. What kind of dispute? Sarah explained the morning's events, the conflicting documentation, and Karen's threats. Emma listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification on specific details. Okay, Emma said when Sarah finished. First thing we need to do is verify your survey. Who conducted it? Precision Land Surveying. I have all their documentation. Good. They are reputable. I want you to call them and request copies of all their field notes and measurements. Also ask if they'll come back out for a verification. Survey, at your expense, but we need to be absolutely certain. The HOA letter suggests my survey is wrong. HOAs aren't surveyors. They're volunteers with clipboards and too much time on their hands. But we need to figure out where they got their information. Do you have a copy of your neighbor's deed? Just what she showed the police officer this morning. I need to see the actual recorded deed at the county clerk's office. And we need to pull the subdivision plat map. Can you meet me there this afternoon? Sarah checked her watch. It was barely 10 in the morning, but she'd already used up a personal day dealing with this mess. Absolutely. 2 o'clock. County. Administration building. 2nd floor. And Sarah, don't do any more landscaping until we sort this out. After hanging up, Sarah tried to focus on her work emails, but concentration was impossible. Every few minutes she found herself looking out the window toward Karen's house, watching for movement behind the curtains. At noon, she was interrupted by her doorbell. Through the peephole, she saw a man in his 60s wearing a polo shirt and khakis, holding a clipboard. His car had a magnetic sign that read Maple Street HOA Board. Sarah opened the door cautiously. Can I help you? MS. Chen. I'm Robert Harrison, President of the Homeowners Association. I understand you received our violation notice. I did, and I'm disputing it. Robert's smile was diplomatic but tired, like a man who'd had this conversation too many times. May I come in? I'd like to discuss this before it becomes a bigger issue. Against her better judgment, Sarah let him in. Robert settled onto her couch and opened his clipboard, revealing a stack of forms and what looked like a hand-drawn property map. I've been president of this HOA for 8 years, he began. I've seen a lot of property disputes, and they usually stem from misunderstandings that could have been avoided with better communication. Mr. Harrison, I had a professional survey done before I bought this house. Every modification I've made is well within my property boundaries. I understand that, but we've received multiple complaints from your neighbor about encroachment issues. When the board investigated, we found some discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies? Robert pulled out the hand-drawn map. This is based on the original subdivision plat from 1987 when this neighborhood was developed. According to these measurements, your survey company may have made an error. Sarah studied the crude drawing. It looked like something a middle schooler might create for a social studies project. Rough lines drawn with a ruler, measurements penciled in at various points. This isn't an official survey. No, but it's based on the official subdivision. Records. Karen Westfield has been very helpful in providing historical information about property boundaries. She's lived here since the neighborhood was new. Karen provided this information. She's very involved in neighborhood preservation. She keeps meticulous records. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Mr. Harrison, with all due respect, this drawing contradicts a professional survey conducted by licensed surveyors using GPS equipment and precision instruments. Which do you think is more accurate? Robert's smile faltered slightly. Ms. Chen, I'm not here to argue about surveying techniques. I'm here to try to resolve this amicably. The board has voted to fine you for violations of our landscaping guidelines. You can either comply voluntarily or we can pursue legal action. What kind of legal action? We can place a lien on your property. We can take you to court for breach of covenant. We can make your life very difficult. His diplomatic tone was slipping, revealing something harder underneath. Or you can simply move your fence, remove the driveway extension, and relocate your garden. Easy fix. Easy fix. Do you know how much that fence cost? How much work I put into that garden? I'm sure it was considerable. But rules are rules. Sarah stood up. I think you should leave. Robert gathered his papers slowly, clearly disappointed that his reasonable approach hadn't worked. Ms. Chen, I hope you'll reconsider. This neighborhood has a certain character, certain standards. We work very hard to maintain property values for everyone. By harassing new residents. By maintaining order. He paused at the door. You know, Karen mentioned that you've been difficult to work with. I was hoping that wasn't true. What exactly did she tell you? That you've been hostile when she's tried to discuss these issues civilly. That you've made some concerning statements about not caring about neighborhood rules. Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. She also mentioned that you might not understand how things work in a community like this. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt her hands clench into fists. And what kind of community is that, exactly? A community where people respect their neighbors and follow established procedures. Robert's voice took on a patronizing edge. Look, I understand that property ownership might be new to you. Maybe where you came from, these kinds of formal agreements weren't as important. But here, we have systems in place. Where I came from. Sarah's voice was dangerously quiet. I just meant, I know exactly what you meant. Get out of my house. Robert's diplomatic mask slipped completely. Fine. But this won't go away just because you don't want to deal with it. The fines start accumulating tomorrow. He left, and Sarah deadbolted the door behind him. Her hands were shaking with anger, but also with something else, fear. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. This was about power, about who belonged in this neighborhood and who didn't. She called Emma Rodriguez again. They just sent the HOA president to intimidate me, she said without preamble. What did he say? Sarah recounted the conversation, including Robert's thinly veiled comments about her background and understanding of property ownership. Son of a bitch, Emma muttered. Okay, this just became a civil rights issue. Did he actually use racial language? Nothing explicit. But the implications were clear. Good enough. We are going to destroy them. But first, we need to document everything. I want you to write down exactly what he said, word for word. Time, date, witnesses if any. And from now on, record every interaction you have with these people. Is that legal? In this state, yes, as long as one party consents. That's you. Emma's voice was sharp with professional anger now. Sarah, I've seen this playbook before. They're trying to make you feel unwelcome so you'll sell and move somewhere else. We are not going to let that happen. At 2 o'clock, Sarah met Emma at the county administration building. Emma was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, with a kind of confidence that came from winning more fights than she'd lost. They spent an hour in the records office, pulling up property deeds, subdivision plats, and survey records going back to the neighborhood's original development. This is interesting, Emma said, studying a computer screen showing the original 1987 subdivision map. According to this, your survey is absolutely correct. Look at these measurements. Sarah leaned over Emma's shoulder. The official county records showed property boundaries that matched her survey exactly. So where did Karen get her information? That's the million-dollar question. Emma printed several copies of the official documents. But I have a theory. Let me show you something. She pulled up another screen showing recent property transactions in the neighborhood. Look at this. Karen Westfield refinanced her house 18 months ago. Part of that process would have required a current survey. So she knows exactly where her property line is. Exactly. And if she had a survey done, it's probably on file with her mortgage company. Emma made notes on her legal pad. I'm going to subpoena those records. Can you do that? Not yet. But if this goes to court, absolutely. Emma closed the laptop and gathered her papers. Sarah, I need to ask you something directly. Is there any posse? The house across the street belonged to an elderly man named Mr. Peterson, who Sarah had met briefly during her first week in the neighborhood. He'd seemed kind but frail, the type who might spend his days watching the street through his windows simply because he had nothing else to do. Emma knocked on his door while Sarah stood behind her, still staring at the red paint defacing her driveway. The message felt like a violation that went deeper than mere vandalism. It was meant to brand her as something she wasn't, to make her neighbors see her as a criminal. Mr. Peterson answered the door slowly, using a walker to steady himself. He was probably in his 70s, with wispy white hair and eyes that seemed sharper than his fragile body suggested. Afternoon. Ladies. You're Sarah from across the street, aren't you? His voice carried a slight tremor but remained clear. I saw what happened to your driveway. Terrible thing. Mr. Peterson, I'm Emma Rodriguez, Ms. Chen's attorney. We are hoping you might have seen who vandalized her property. The old man's eyes sharpened further. Lawyer, eh? Must be more serious than just some kids with spray paint. It's part of an ongoing harassment campaign, Emma said carefully. We noticed you have a security camera that faces the street. Indeed I do. Had it installed after my mailbox got knocked over 3 times last year. Mr. Peterson shuffled back from the door. Come in, come in. Let's see what we can find. His living room was neat but outdated, filled with the kind of furniture that had been expensive 40 years ago. The security monitor sat on a table by the front window, cycling through feeds from cameras mounted around his property. When did this happen? He asked, settling into his recliner with obvious relief. Sometime between noon and 3 o'clock, Sarah said. Mr. Peterson's gnarled fingers worked the controls with surprising dexterity. Let's see. Here we go. Noon today. The footage was surprisingly clear. Sarah watched herself leave her house. At 12:47, followed by Emma's arrival at 1:45. At 2:23, both their cars pulled away from a curb. At 2:31, Karen Westfield appeared on screen. She moved quickly, carrying what looked like a spray paint can and a piece of paper. Karen glanced around nervously before crossing the street to Sarah's driveway. The camera captured her checking the paper, which appeared to be some kind of template or guide, before carefully painting the red line across the concrete. Well, I'll be damned, Mr. Peterson muttered. Your neighbors got quite the artistic streak. Emma was already recording the footage with her phone. Mr. Peterson, would you be willing to provide us with a copy of this recording? Absolutely. That woman's been nothing but trouble since she moved in. Sarah blinked. Karen's been here for 15 years. Karen. Oh no, dear. I'm talking about the woman before you. Karen ran her off too. The room went silent except for the soft whir of the security system's hard drive. What do you mean, ran her off? Emma asked. Mr. Peterson paused the video and turned to face them. Sweet girl named Maria. Bought the house about 3 years ago. Within 6 months, Karen was filing complaints about everything. Her fence, her garden, her choice of paint color. Said it was bringing down property values. What happened to her? Sold the house and moved away. Karen made her life miserable. HOA fines, harassment, the whole 9 yards. His weathered face creased with disapproval. I tried to help, but I'm just one old man. Maria didn't have the fight in her that you seem to have. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. So this isn't the first time. Oh, heavens no. Karen's run off at least 3 families in the 15 years I've lived here. Always has some excuse: property lines, HOA violations, neighborhood standards. He made air quotes with arthritic fingers. But it's always the same pattern. New family moves in, Karen finds fault, makes their life hell until they leave. Emma had stopped recording and was taking notes. Mr. Peterson, would you be willing to testify about this pattern of behavior? In court, you mean? If necessary, yes. The old man straightened in his chair, and for a moment Sarah could see the younger, stronger man he'd once been. Damn right I will. I'm tired of watching good people get bullied out of their homes. Emma copied the security footage to her laptop, while Mr. Peterson told them about Karen's previous victims. There was Maria, the young teacher who'd lasted 8 months. Before her, a retired couple named the Johnsons who'd moved out after Karen, convinced the city to cite them for maintaining an unlawful vegetable garden in their backyard. And before them, a single father whose crime had been installing a basketball hoop for his teenage son. Same pattern every time, Mr. Peterson explained. Karen buddies up with Robert Harrison and whoever else is on the HOA board. They pile on the violations and fines until people can't afford to fight anymore. But why? Sarah asked. What does she get out of it? Control. And property values. Every time someone sells quick to get away from her harassment, she swoops in with a lowball cash offer through some LLC, renovates the place and flips it for double what she paid. Emma looked up from her laptop. You're saying she's been systematically driving out neighbors to buy their houses cheap? That's exactly what I'm saying. Check the property records. I'll bet you find that LLC of hers has bought and sold at least 3 houses on this street in the past 5 years. Sarah felt dizzy. She's been planning this since the day I moved in. Probably before you even moved in, Mr. Peterson corrected. Karen makes it her business to know who's buying houses in the neighborhood. I saw her talking to the realtor during your closing process. Emma was already pulling up property records on her laptop. What's the name of the LLC? Maple Street Properties, I think. Something generic like that. Emma's fingers flew across the keyboard. After a few minutes, she looked up with an expression that was equal parts amazement and fury. Jesus Christ. Maple Street Holdings LLC. Owned by one Karen M. Westfield. They've purchased 4 properties on this street in the past 6 years, all well below market value. Sold them within 12 months for an average profit of $80,000 each. So this whole thing, the property dispute, the HOA harassment, the vandalism, it's all about trying to force me to sell cheap. That's fraud, Emma said. Firmly. Intentional interference with business relations, conspiracy, harassment. We can destroy her with this. But even as relief flooded through her, Sarah felt something else. Anger so pure and hot it surprised her. Karen hadn't just been harassing her. She'd been running a systematic con game, destroying people's lives for profit. What about the others? She asked. Maria, the Johnsons, that single father. Don't they deserve justice too? If we can find them and they're willing to testify, absolutely. We could turn this into a class action suit. Mr. Peterson was nodding approvingly. Now you're talking. It's about time someone held that woman accountable. Sarah's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Pretty paint job. Hope you like the color. She showed the message to Emma, who screenshot it immediately. She's taunting you now. That's a mistake. Emma packed up her laptop. Sarah, I need you to go home and stay there. Don't engage with Karen. Don't respond to any more texts. Don't even look in her direction. We are going to let her hang herself. What's the plan? First, we are filing criminal charges for vandalism and harassment. The security footage is slam dunk evidence. Then we are going after the HOA for their part in this conspiracy. And finally, we are going to sue Karen Westfield for every penny she's made off this scheme. They thanked Mr. Peterson and walked back across the street. Sarah's driveway looked even worse in the afternoon sun, the red paint stark against the grey concrete. But now, instead of shame, she felt something like satisfaction. Karen had made a crucial mistake. In her arrogance, she'd provided them with exactly the evidence they needed. As they reached Sarah's front door, Emma's phone rang. Rodriguez. Law. What? When? We'll be right there. She hung up and turned to Sarah with a grim expression. That was the police station. Karen Westfield just filed a complaint against you for assault and destruction of property. She claims you attacked her this afternoon and vandalized her car. Sarah stared at her lawyer. But I was with you at the county records office all afternoon. I know that. You know that. The question is, can we prove it? They were interrupted by the sound of a car door slamming. Karen stood next to a white Mercedes with a deep scratch along the driver's side door. She was crying, or at least making a convincing show of it, and talking rapidly to Officer Martinez, who'd returned to Maple Street looking considerably less patient than he had that morning. That's her, officer, Karen said, pointing at Sarah. She keyed my car while I was at my doctor's appointment, and when I confronted her about it, she pushed me and threatened to make me pay. Officer Martinez looked tired. Ms. Chen, I'm going to need you to come down to the station for questioning. Officer, Emma stepped forward. I'm Ms. Chen's attorney. My client has an alibi for the entire afternoon. We were together at the county administration building from 2 to 4 o'clock. I have time-stamped receipts and witness statements. That's convenient, Karen said, her tears drying up remarkably quickly. I'm sure you can fabricate whatever paperwork you need. Are you accusing me of suborning perjury? Emma's voice was deadly quiet. I'm just saying that lawyers know how to make. Officer Martinez followed Sarah's gaze to the ornate mailbox post, its decorative iron finial gleaming in the afternoon sun. Karen's face went pale as the officer approached the post and examined the white paint and clear coat caught on the sharp metal point. Ms. Westfield, Officer Martinez said slowly, can you explain how paint from your car ended up on this mailbox post? That's not from my car. That paint could be from anything. But even as she spoke, Officer Martinez was comparing the paint chips to the fresh scratch on her Mercedes. The match was obvious. Same shade of white, same type of clear coat, same metallic flecks in the paint. This mailbox post is at the exact height and angle that would cause the damage to your vehicle. And the paint transfer suggests recent contact. Emma stepped closer to examine the evidence, her phone camera capturing everything. Officer, it appears that Ms. Westfield damaged her own vehicle and is attempting to file a false police report. That's ridiculous. Karen's composure was cracking now, her voice rising to a near shriek. Why would I damage my own car? To frame my client for a crime she didn't commit, Emma replied calmly. The same way you vandalized her driveway and then sent her threatening text messages. Officer Martinez turned to Karen, his patience clearly exhausted. Ms. Westfield, I'm going to need you to explain the discrepancies in your statement. What discrepancies? I told you exactly what happened. You told me Ms. Chen vandalized your car between 3 and 4 p.m., but we have time-stamped security footage showing she wasn't here during that time. We also have physical evidence suggesting you caused the damage yourself. Karen looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. Her eyes landed on the small crowd of neighbors who had gathered to watch the drama unfold. Sarah recognized most of them, the young couple from 2 houses down, the woman with the golden retriever who always walked past during her morning jog, the teenagers from the end of the street who were probably supposed to be in school. These people will tell you, Karen said, gesturing wildly at the crowd. They've seen how aggressive she's been, how she doesn't fit in here. But instead of supportive nods, Sarah saw something different in her neighbors' faces. The young couple was whispering to each other and looking uncomfortable. The woman with the golden retriever was actually backing away from Karen. Even the teenagers seemed more interested in recording the scene with their phones than supporting Karen's claims. Officer Martinez said firmly, I need you to calm down and answer my questions. Did you or did you not cause the damage to your own vehicle? Of course not. I would never. She was interrupted by the sound of another car pulling up. A black SUV with tinted windows parked behind the police cruiser, and 2 people got out, a man in an expensive suit and a woman carrying a briefcase and camera equipment. Emma cursed under her breath. Private investigator and news crew. Someone called this in. The man in the suit approached Officer Martinez with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. Officer, I'm David Westfield, Karen's husband. I understand my wife is being harassed by this woman. Sarah had heard Karen mention her husband but had never seen him. He was tall and imposing, with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from golf courses and vacation homes. Everything about him screamed money and influence. Mr. Westfield, your wife filed a complaint alleging assault and vandalism. However, we've discovered evidence that suggests evidence. David interrupted. What kind of evidence? Officer Martinez gestured toward the mailbox post. Physical evidence indicating your wife may have damaged her own vehicle. David's face darkened as he examined the paint transfer. For a moment, something like recognition flickered across his features, followed quickly by what looked like resignation. Karen, he said quietly, what have you done? Nothing. I haven't done anything wrong. She's the one who, Karen. David's voice carried the weight of long experience with his wife's behavior. Stop talking. The woman with the camera had been filming everything, and now she approached with a microphone. This is Rebecca Martinez from Channel 7 News. We've received reports of an ongoing property dispute in this neighborhood. Can you comment on the allegations of harassment and fraud? Fraud? David turned sharply toward the reporter. What fraud? Emma stepped forward, clearly deciding this was the moment to play their strongest hand. Mr. Westfield, are you aware that your wife owns an LLC called Maple Street Holdings that has systematically purchased properties in this neighborhood after forcing out residents through harassment campaigns? The color drained from David's face. That's not possible. Public records show 4 property transactions in the past 6 years, all involving residents who were subjected to HOA violations and harassment before selling below market value. David turned to stare at his wife, and Karen's expression told him everything he needed to know. Jesus Christ, Karen, tell me you didn't. It was a good investment opportunity. People were selling anyway, and you've been running a real estate scam? Using the HOA to drive out neighbors so you could buy their houses cheap. The neighborhood crowd had grown larger, and Sarah could see people recording with their phones, taking pictures, whispering among themselves. The story was spreading in real time across social media. It wasn't a scam. Karen's voice was getting higher and more desperate. It was legitimate business. If people can't maintain property standards, they don't belong in a neighborhood like this. Property standards. Mr. Peterson had emerged from his house and was walking slowly toward the group, using his walker but moving with obvious determination. Is that what you call driving out Maria Santos because she planted tomatoes in her backyard? Or forcing the Johnson family to move because their teenage grandson visited too often? Who are you? David demanded. Harold Peterson. I've lived across the street for 20 years, and I've watched your wife destroy 3 families before she started. On Ms. Chen. He gestured toward Sarah. But this time, we have evidence. Emma pulled out her laptop and showed David the security footage of Karen vandalizing Sarah's driveway. Then she displayed the property records showing the pattern of purchases through Maple Street Holdings. David watched in silence, his face growing darker with each revelation. When the footage ended, he turned to Karen with an expression of pure disgust. 15 years of marriage, and I never knew I was married to a criminal. I'm not a criminal. I was protecting our investment, property values, neighborhood integrity. By terrorizing innocent people? By filing false police reports? By running a goddamn fraud scheme. Officer Martinez had been taking notes throughout the confrontation. Now he stepped forward with his handcuffs. Karen Westfield, you're under arrest for filing a false police report, destruction of property, and harassment. No, you can't arrest me. I'm the victim here. But as Officer Martinez read her rights, Karen's protests became increasingly hysterical. David stood back, shaking his head in what looked like a mixture of shame and relief, as if a weight he hadn't known he was carrying had finally been lifted. The news crew captured everything: Karen being handcuffed, David's obvious shock and disgust, the gathered neighbors finally finding their voices to speak out about what they'd witnessed over the years. This is going to be all over the news tonight, Emma murmured to Sarah. And social media is already exploding. Look. She showed Sarah her phone, where videos of the arrest were already being shared and commented on. #MapleStreetKaren was trending locally, with neighbors sharing their own stories of Karen's harassment and suspicious property dealings. As the police cruiser pulled away with Karen in the backseat, David approached Sarah. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "Ms. Chen, I owe you an enormous apology. I had no idea what Karen was doing." "You really didn't know about the LLC?" "I knew she was involved in some real estate investments, but she handled all the details. I work 60-hour weeks and travel constantly for business. I trusted her to manage our local affairs." He ran his hands through his hair. "I should have paid more attention." "Mr. Westfield," Emma interjected, "your wife's actions have caused significant financial and emotional damages to multiple families. There will likely be civil lawsuits." "I understand. And I'll make sure everyone gets compensated appropriately. Karen's actions don't represent who I am or what I believe in." The crowd was beginning to disperse, but Sarah could see neighbors stopping to talk to each other, sharing stories, comparing experiences. The silence that Karen had imposed on the community through fear and intimidation was finally breaking. Mr. Peterson approached Sarah with a satisfied smile. "Well, young lady, I'd say you've accomplished something remarkable today. You didn't just defend yourself, you liberated this entire neighborhood. I couldn't have done it without your help. Without that security footage, that footage was just evidence. The real victory was refusing to be bullied. Too many good people let Karen drive them away. You stood your ground." Emma was fielding calls from reporters and other potential clients who'd heard about the case. The story was spreading beyond just the local neighborhood, becoming a symbol of standing up to neighborhood bullies and fraudulent HOA schemes. As the sun began to set, Sarah found herself SD. 6 months later, Sarah stood in her front yard watching a young family move into the house that had once belonged to Karen and David Westfield. The new owners, Miguel and Anna Restrepo and their twin daughters, had specifically sought out the house after hearing Sarah's story on the news. They wanted to be part of a neighborhood that had proven it could stand up to bullies. "Need any help with those boxes?" Sarah called out, walking over to the property line that was now clearly marked with small decorative stones she'd placed along the surveyed boundary. "We've got it, thanks." Miguel replied, but his wife Anna came over to introduce herself properly. "You're the famous Karen fighter," Anna said with a warm smile. "Our realtor told us all about what happened here. You're a hero in our family." "I just planted some roses," Sarah said, though she couldn't help but smile. Everything else was just protecting them. The roses had flourished over the summer and into fall, climbing up the small trellis she'd installed and spreading into a riot of pink blooms that drew compliments from everyone who passed by. More importantly, they'd become a symbol for the neighborhood, a sign that bullying and intimidation would no longer be tolerated on Maple Street. Sarah's phone buzzed with a call from Emma. Even though the criminal case had concluded 3 months ago, they still talked regularly. Emma had become not just her lawyer but a genuine friend, and their victory in the Karen Westfield case had led to a partnership on several other HOA harassment cases. "Sarah, you're going to want to sit down for this news." Good news or bad news? Incredible news. The FBI just closed their investigation. Final tally: Karen and her network were responsible for fraudulent real estate transactions totaling over $12 million across 7 states. Sarah did indeed sit down, settling onto her front steps where she'd spent so many evenings that summer, watching her neighborhood slowly heal. 12 million. 12.3, to be exact. Karen got 15 years in federal prison. Her co-conspirators got varying sentences, but the ringleader, turns out Karen was just middle. Management got 25 years. And the victims? Full restitution, plus punitive damages. Maria Santos is getting enough money to buy a house twice as nice as the one Karen forced her out of. The Johnson family is considering moving back to the neighborhood. And that single father, his settlement is paying for his son's college education. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. That's incredible. It gets better. The Department of Housing and Urban Development is using our case as the foundation for new federal guidelines on HOA oversight. They're calling it the Maple Street Protocols, basically a framework for identifying and prosecuting neighborhood harassment schemes. We are getting federal protocols named after us. You're getting federal protocols named after you. I'm just the lawyer who was smart enough to take your case. After hanging up, Sarah sat quietly for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had grown from her simple decision to plant roses in her own yard. Across the street, Mr. Peterson was, sitting on his front porch, probably enjoying the afternoon sun and the entertainment of watching the new family move in. She walked over to visit him, something that had become a regular routine. Harold Peterson had become an unexpected friend and mentor, and his testimony in Karen's trial had been devastating to the defense. He'd kept meticulous records of every family Karen had harassed, every suspicious property transaction, every HOA meeting where mysterious new violations had been suddenly introduced. Afternoon. Harold. How are you feeling today? Better every day that woman stays in prison, he said with satisfaction. Did you see the news crew that came by this morning? Another one. CBS this time. They're doing a documentary about neighborhood fraud schemes. Apparently, our little street has become famous in academic circles too. They're teaching about the Westfield case in law schools and business ethics classes. Sarah settled into the chair he kept for her visits. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just moved the roses like she wanted. You'd be living somewhere else, and Maria Santos would still be too afraid to come back to this neighborhood. The Johnson family would still think they deserve to be treated like criminals for letting their grandson visit. And Karen would be starting her campaign against that nice young family across the street. They watched Miguel and Anna directing. The movers, their daughters playing hopscotch on the sidewalk with the carefree confidence of children who'd never been told they didn't belong somewhere. Harold, can I ask you something that's been bothering me? Shoot. Why didn't anyone speak up before? You knew what Karen was doing for years. Other neighbors must have seen it too. Harold was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folded in his lap. Fear, mostly. And shame. When you're old like me, you start to doubt yourself. When Karen would claim that Maria's vegetable garden was against HOA rules, part of me wondered if maybe she was right and I just didn't understand the regulations. When she said the Johnson boy was causing disturbances, I thought maybe my hearing wasn't good enough to notice the problems. But you knew it was wrong. In my gut, yes. But Karen was so confident, so sure of herself. She had all these official-looking documents, all these connections with the HOA board. And she'd make you feel like you were the problem for questioning her. He looked directly at Sarah. That's what bullies do best. They make you doubt your own reality. So what changed when I moved in? Harold smiled. You didn't doubt yourself. When Karen told you that you were wrong about your property line, you didn't think maybe I misunderstood the survey. You thought, let me get my paperwork and prove this woman wrong. That confidence gave the rest of us permission to trust our instincts again. Sarah's phone rang again. This time it was a mother, calling from the house Sarah had grown up in across town. Sarah, we just saw you on the evening news again. They were talking about some new law. New federal guidelines. Mom, they're going to help protect other homeowners from what happened to me. Your father wants to know if you're finally going to write that book everyone keeps asking you about. Sarah laughed. I'm an engineer, not a writer. You're a fighter, her mother corrected. And fighters sometimes need to tell their stories, so other people know how to fight too. After the call ended, Sarah realized her mother might be right. Emma had been fielding calls from publishers for months, and Sarah had turned them all down. But maybe there was value in documenting not just what had happened, but how it had felt to be systematically gaslit and harassed, and how she'd found the strength to fight back. The sun was setting, painting Maple Street in the same golden light that had illuminated her first morning here, when she'd knelt in her garden and unknowingly started a war by planting roses. But now the street felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from the entire neighborhood. David Westfield had sold the house quickly, just as he'd promised, and moved to Montana where he'd bought a cabin with no neighbors. 4 miles. He'd sent Sarah a letter of apology along with a check covering the cost of repairing her driveway and replacing the roses that had been damaged during the police investigation. The letter had been simple and heartfelt. I should have known. I should have paid attention. I should have stopped her before she hurt so many people. I'm sorry. The new HOA board, elected in a landslide after Robert Harrison and 2 other Karen allies had resigned in disgrace, had immediately repealed most of the arbitrary regulations that had been used to harass residents. They'd also implemented new transparency requirements and an appeals process for violations, ensuring that no single board member could weaponize HOA rules against their personal enemies. As Sarah walked back to her own house, she stopped to check on her roses. They were dormant now, preparing for winter, but come spring they would bloom again, bigger and stronger than before. Her phone buzzed with one final text of the day, this one from Maria Santos, closing on my new house next week. 2 blocks from you. Can't wait to have you as a neighbor again. And Sarah, I'm planting the biggest vegetable garden this neighborhood has ever seen. Sarah smiled and typed back, I'll bring the roses. Standing in her front yard, looking at the house she'd fought so hard to keep, Sarah realized that this had never really been about property lines or homeowners associations or even Karen Westfield's criminal schemes. It had been about something much simpler and much more profound, the right to exist in your own space without apology, without shrinking yourself to make others comfortable, without accepting that you deserve less because someone else says so. The roses had been her line in the sand, but the real victory was this, standing on her own property, in her own neighborhood, surrounded by people who'd learned to stand up for themselves and each other. Karen had tried to build a kingdom of fear and intimidation, but all she'd actually accomplished was teaching an entire community how to fight back. Sarah walked up to her front door, keys in hand, ready to go inside her house, her home, where tomorrow she would start writing the first chapter of a book about roses, property lines, and the power of refusing to be moved. Behind her, street lights came on one by one, illuminating Maple Street like a runway for all the dreams that had finally been allowed to land. The war was over, and Sarah had won.